This cemetery is the final resting place of whistleblower Wenliang. He was a doctor in Wuhan, China, and before he died of COVID at age 34, he was one of the first people in the world who sounded the alarm about an emerging SARS-like virus. In the final weeks of his life, he became a household name and took on many roles: a victim of censorship, a patient, and to many, a hero. More than 2 years after his death, Dr. Li remains a galvanizing figure in China. His Weibo page regularly receives hundreds of comments a week and has become a place where people pay tribute and share personal stories. A government investigation concluded Dr. Li's death was a tragedy and that he should not have been reprimanded for speaking out. But a more complete picture of his medical care and his treatment by authorities has remained elusive. To fill in some of those gaps, The Times has exclusively spoken to a colleague of Dr. Li who was on the front lines of the COVID fight. He asked to remain anonymous. We're referring to him only as Dr. B. He provided a first-hand account of the decisions made during Dr. Li's final hours.
他已经抢救了2个小时了，这时候心跳都还没恢复呢，这已经是一个死人了。
We also obtained internal memos from the hospital where Dr. Li worked, as well as his medical daily progress notes and doctor's orders, verified by multiple experts and matched up with public information from Chinese media. We found no evidence his medical care was compromised. But these documents, along with Dr. B's account and expert analysis, reveal important new details about his illness and treatment. Taken together, they show how Dr. Li spent his last 39 days, going up against a deadly virus and navigating government attempts to censor him.
我觉得对我最大的影响就是他说的一句话，我觉得一个健康的社会不应该只有一种声音。
一个健康的社会不该只有一种声音。
Wenliang never set out to be a whistleblower. He was working as an ophthalmologist at Wuhan Central Hospital in late December 2019 when he started sharing information he was hearing with friends in a private group chat. Huanan Seafood and Fruit Market has 7 confirmed SARS, said one message. He also sent a photo of a virus sequencing report with the words SARS-like coronavirus. A screenshot of this group chat leaked to the public. It immediately triggered concern because the mere mention of SARS reminded people of the deadly epidemic that gripped China in 2003. Even as the official COVID case numbers rose, authorities tried to control the message behind the scenes. Dr. Li was one of their first targets. At this point, the public didn't know who he was. On December 31st, hospital officials made him write a formal apology for spreading rumors. In the document, which we are making public for the first time, he says that he deeply regretted the negative impact he had caused. Several days later, local police made Dr. Li sign a statement promising to never spread rumors again. On that day, Wuhan health authorities were publicly insisting this new virus was not known to transmit between humans. But physicians in the city were watching a very different story unfold, including Dr. B, who was working at the front lines at Wuhan Central Hospital.
我们的一位患者当时诊断明确是肺部感染，过来接这个患者的人穿的全是防护服，我觉得只在电影上面我见到过那种防护服。
He was one of the first doctors in the world to ever treat a COVID-19 patient. He has to remain anonymous because he fears reprisals from the Chinese government.
为什么大家都会这个病人这么紧张？为什么医院会一而再再而三的叫我们不要到处说，不要去传播这个事情，甚至说在微信里面都不要发这些东西，就是不要跟朋友说。
12 days after Wenliang's messages leaked, authorities still insisted there was no evidence that the virus was transmissible. They also claimed no medical workers had been infected. Neither was true.
收到这个消息的时候， 当时有好几个医生都在骂，说这怎么可能没有人传染？急诊那么多的病例，一家人都是这个病。当时武汉市中心医院已经有医务人员感染。
One of those infected medical workers was Dr. Li. By January 11th, almost 2 weeks after his messages had been leaked, he had a fever, and a CT scan showed multiple lung infections. On January 12th, he checked into Wuhan Central Hospital. Each day, hospitals in Wuhan were seeing more people sick with COVID, but the government reported no new cases for several days. Internal memos from Wuhan Central Hospital obtained by the Times illustrate that there was a confusing process in place for hospital staffers. Approvals to report new cases were subject to shifting instructions from district level, city level, and provincial level bureaucracies. Dr. Li's own case appeared to be getting worse. He was struggling physically, but also mentally. The medical records we obtained show that on January 19th, in addition to having severe pneumonia, he was also diagnosed as being in a depressive state. We made exact replicas of the records, taking out details that could identify the source. We also redacted some sections to preserve Dr. Li's privacy. On January 20th, there was a turning point. For the first time, the government acknowledged that the virus was indeed contagious.
它是肯定的有人传人，一个在武汉是有这样的肯定的一些证据。
Wuhan hospitals soon became overwhelmed by the number of patients with COVID symptoms. Soon after, the entire city of Wuhan went into lockdown. As this was happening, Dr. Li had to be transferred to intensive care. From his hospital bed, he made an important decision: to share his story with the public. He gave an anonymous interview to a Chinese newspaper as the Wuhan doctor who was reprimanded by authorities and said he had contracted COVID. Several days later, he revealed his name and identity on his Weibo account. The public finally got to know more about this mysterious doctor and wanted updates about his health. They saw him as a kind of folk hero and were angry about the way authorities reprimanded him. In the following week, his condition didn't seem to improve. Dr. Wu Yuanfei, a virologist at UMass Chan Medical School, reviewed Dr. Li's medical records for the Times.
就是他感染的这个病毒非常早，病程非常凶险，发展得非常快。
In addition to Dr. Wu, the Times has shared Dr. Li's medical records with 7 US-based Chinese medical experts who used to practice medicine in China or have experience treating COVID patients in the US. All of them believe there was no intentional negligence in Dr. Li's treatment, and there is no evidence the doctors were motivated by a political agenda.
You get a sense they were trying to do whatever they can, but nothing worked.
But the records and Dr. B's account give us better insight into how he was treated and raise questions about how authorities communicated the attempts to resuscitate him. 25 days into his hospitalization on February 5th, Wenliang's condition deteriorated. In the afternoon, the doctor's order shows they did a number of examinations to evaluate his lung and heart. By the morning of February 6th, doctors wrote in the progress notes that Wenliang's lungs were severely damaged, and he was at high risk of multiple organ failure. Most experts we spoke to agreed that at this point, few things could have helped him, except to immediately put him on an invasive ventilator to ease his breathing.
Since you already tried a lung-invasive ventilator, the patient couldn't tolerate, and you already tried high flow on oxygen for several days, it's still time to consider intubation at that point.
But Dr. Li wasn't intubated, though we don't know why. Some doctors are reluctant to intubate young patients, and sometimes the patients themselves refuse it. There is no consensus to this day on when invasive ventilators should be used on COVID patients. Dr. Li's health was about to take a turn for the worse and put the public on edge. Around 7:20 p.m. the night of February 6th, Dr. Li went into cardiac arrest. His medical team immediately started to perform CPR, and at that point followed common practice and intubated him as part of resuscitation. Shortly after his resuscitation began, Dr. Li's medical team considered putting him on a machine called ECMO. The invasive life support system adds oxygen to the blood and has been used by some doctors as a last resort for severe COVID-19 patients. Though its effect is still debated, at the beginning of the pandemic, Chinese media portrayed ECMO as a promising treatment, and much of the public were holding out hope that there would be a miracle. Dr. B arrived around 9 p.m., about 2 hours into the resuscitation. An ECMO machine borrowed from another hospital was in the room. According to him, it was not in use. At that point, Dr. B said doctors in the intensive care ward thought that using ECMO was meaningless because Dr. Li was already clinically dead.
按照正常流程的话，已经是可以宣告死亡了。
But he said hospital administrators asked the medical team to use ECMO anyway because they wanted to signal to the public that they did everything possible to save Dr. Li.
当时有人在旁边接电话，说领导层说继续抢救，从技术良心上讲是不该上，抢救完全是在抢救尸体，完全是在给管理层在拖时间。上ECMO的话，纯粹属于对尸体的一种亵渎吧。
The 6 physicians we spoke to agreed it would have been too late to use ECMO.
I don't think that's gonna improve the prognosis. I don't think it's gonna do anything.
Dr. B left the room around midnight. He says ECMO had not been used because an instrument to perform the procedure was not available. It is unclear whether it was ultimately used after he left. There is also no indication in the doctor's orders from that night that the procedure was ever administered. But for some reason, the daily progress notes say ECMO was used. It's the only discrepancy of this kind we found in the entire medical records. A subsequent government-led investigation also concluded the procedure was performed. As the rescue efforts continued, Dr. B knew there was no hope.
我觉得李洪亮医生在2月6号9点钟我见到他的时候，他就已经死掉了。
An echocardiogram report from around 9:10 p.m. on February 6th corroborates Dr. B's account. It showed that his heart had stopped beating. Shortly after, a state-run publication called Life Times reported that Dr. Li's time of death was 9:30 p.m. The hospital didn't announce Dr. Li's death for another few hours, and they said he had died at 2:58 a.m. Many online commenters were upset that the death announcement came so late, and so was Dr. B.
拖了这么久才宣布，医院确实没有把我们当人看。当时就是哭呀，不知道什么感觉，感觉到可能有什么东西崩塌了一样的感觉吧。
Li Wenliang's death shook the country. On Weibo, hashtags demanding freedom of speech started trending following online reports of his death. They reached millions of views. A few hours later, they had been removed by censors. To this day, the Chinese government is carefully managing conversations about Dr. Li online. They granted him an honorary burial and named him a national hero, but often punish people for commemorating him as a victim of censorship. In the 2 years since Dr. Li's death, the Chinese government has continued to conceal and revise the history of its handling of the pandemic. The Times learned that last year, at least 3 major hospitals in Wuhan, including Wuhan Central Hospital, restricted doctors' access to COVID-19 patient records from the early days of the outbreak. For Dr. B, going public with his version of events is an attempt to get his story out and honor Dr. Li's legacy.
这件事情总会在大众的视野中消失，但是我也始终觉得，别忘记也好，总该给这个世界留下点什么。
This is Mu Yi, one of the producers of this video. Our team spent over a year piecing together details of Dr. Li Wenliang's final days. We interviewed a key witness, multiple medical experts, and examined many documents. But there is still more to learn about what happened to Dr. Li. If you have more information and would like to share, please reach out to us. If you want to see more stories from Visual Investigations, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at the link on the screen.